Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter,
business editor and columnist Greg Jefferson,
reporter Brian Chasnoff.
And we're roughly about a month into stay-at-home policies, both in San Antonio and in much of the country in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As of Monday morning when we're recording this, San Antonio has exceeded 1,000 cases, and we've had 39 deaths in the San Antonio area. And we got a lot to talk about. I since so many people are having to spend so much time at home, hope you all are doing well, and I wanted to check in with the group and see any entertainment options or recommendations that you have for people out there who are having to spend a lot of time at home and trying to think of things to do.
Sure, I'll go first.
Okay.
I started watching the Better Call Saul series. Have you guys seen that?
Bits of it.
I haven't gotten started on the fifth season.
I love Better Call Saul. Love it.
It's the prequel to Breaking Bad, and I kind of like it more than I liked Breaking Bad, and I loved Breaking Bad.
Whoa.
So you're like,
I would not go that far, but
Really?
It's really good.
I would.
Yeah, really.
I would go that far.
So you're like binge watching, you know?
Bob Odenkirk.
Josh, you're just being argumentative. That's all.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Fight me.
Okay.
But-
Anybody else have any?
Let's see. I've been rewatching Fleabag mostly.
Oh my God, that's great.
Oh yeah.
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 And I just ordered Fleabag: The Scriptures, which is just basically all of the Fleabag scripts with commentary. And I'm really honked off because it's going to take 3 weeks to get here. But
This weekend, I
can't wait to get it.
I just saw
if you
the
can channel your anger and frustration to that. That's probably
Yeah, I know. It's the little
this weekend,
things we need to focus on, you know.
just saw the there's the sort of the live one person performance that she
Oh,
did
yeah.
of it, which
Yeah, we
which
watched
I
that
hadn't
over
seen
the
that before. That was very interesting, and you see how much of that ended up in the series. How about you, Josh?
You know, I've just been watching like a lot of Love Is Blind. You know,
Yeah.
It's no, but I mean, we did actually go through that, but
I'd peg you for like Werner Herzog or something. Really?
yeah,
Love
man,
Is Blind?
I'm not watching a lot of Fitzcarraldo these days.
You and my daughter need to talk about Love Is Blind because I think you all are both really into that.
Yeah, and maybe
Nah,
off air you can explain to me what Love Is Blind is because I've never heard of it.
Look, I'm not gonna waste the time on the explanatory comma right here, but
Isn't it
Reality
kind of-
show where people are forced to get married, basically, right?
yeah, basically.
They're forced to get married.
Isn't it kind of designed for the coronavirus era because they don't meet each other before they? Isn't it all done remotely? The dating
That's
is
right.
done remotely?
That's true.
it's perfect.
Yeah, that is
Yeah, but
perfect.
then they meet afterwards. But I have been like actually just like watching like a lot of things that are relatively, I guess, sort of plotless or like plot light. Like I watched Stop Making Sense a couple weeks ago,
Oh,
the
that's
Talking
great.
Heads concert documentary. Then
Yeah.
a couple days ago, rewatched A Hard Day's Night. Love that movie.
Great.
But man, it just like anything too involved right now. It's just kind of like, all right, I'm just gonna go to sleep.
Stuff that helps you forget for a little bit is, that's probably a good thing. For me, it was like bookended. The weekend was bookended by release of the new Fiona Apple album, highly recommended. And then Sunday, the debut of the ESPN Last Dance series on Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls, where you get to see Michael Jordan yell at his teammates, and it's really awesome. So I think we had 2 parts out of 10. So that's
Where is the Michael Jordan one streaming?
what's ESPN? Yeah.
ESPN. Okay.
Yeah, and it was basically the Bulls allowed a film crew to come in for the last season that he was with them, and so you see a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And then in this documentary they use that footage and then kind of retrace his whole career and everything, and it's pretty amazing.
Cool.
So let's get to COVID-19 stuff. As we're recording this is the first day in which San Antonio has had a mandate that everyone wear masks in public, or I guess in situations where they're going to be within 6 feet of each other. Josh, I mean, this is was there any serious debate, at City Hall over whether this this step was any controversy or question about this from what you could tell?
No, I mean, I didn't get a sense that there was a whole lot of controversy around it within City Hall, but there was sort of like a sort of a minor, uh, God, I don't know how to describe it. They had basically, after it was announced last week,
Mm-hmm.
that it was basically going to go into effect immediately. The city had to come out a couple hours later and say, no, we're postponing it until Monday. I think they understood that if you put it into effect immediately, that would cause all sorts of problems. People would have trouble getting the masks,
Right.
um, and they're in terms of enforcement. They're City Attorney Andy Segovia has been saying, look, it's kind of like the beginning of sort of the stay-at-home orders.
Yeah.
We're not going to be sort of like roving the streets looking for people who are in violation, and we're not looking to fine people, but we do want people to comply. Is basically the city's aim on that,
Yeah.
and they're saying they're trying to be flexible about it. It is
Is
geared toward
Sorry to interrupt. I was going to ask Josh, do you know whether HEB is going to start requiring people to put those masks on to come into the store?
You know what? I put something in my story yesterday, and I can't remember
I
off the
think they
top of
will.
my head. But
Well,
they're basically
yeah,
basically like businesses are broadly sort of like allowed to dictate whether they're going to allow you into the store
well,
Yeah.
if you're not wearing a mask.
yeah,
Was
I
we've
would
what
heard
just,
the
that.
city attorney said.
I
Yeah, we've
just went
heard at
to
some
the,
HEVs that
yeah, I'm sorry. Go
they're
ahead.
actually. Oh, sorry.
Love this
Yeah,
crosstalk.
yeah.
This is what
Anyway, we've
everybody
heard
listens
that
for.
at some HEBs, they're reminding people that the next time they come in, if they don't have a mask on, they need to wear a mask in order to get into the store. I mean, I stopped by my neighborhood HEB yesterday. That
Mm-hmm.
wasn't the case. But on the other hand, just about, I would say like 9/10 of the customers there were wearing masks. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're going to limit people to, I think, to 25% or something like that of the capacity of the stores, right? They're trying to kind of, which I think HEB was probably doing something along those lines anyway, if not exactly that type of thing. But they were trying to kind of, limit the number of people in there so that there'd be a possibility for social distancing. Yeah.
I don't know if y'all have seen this at all, but I saw a couple headlines over the weekend about how some experts are recommending that grocery stores just stop letting people come in at all, and they just do it all curbside and
Yeah.
delivery. I hope it doesn't come to that, but
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I was interested in, Brian, you had a piece last week on a couple of models that came out of UTSA looking at, what the effects of COVID-19 would be under different circumstances. For example, if we just went back to normal immediately, if we maintained the sort of social distancing for the next few months. I mean, what did you find when you looked into that?
Sure. So there are two separate models from UTSA. The first one came out of the mathematics department using mostly Metro Health data.
Right.
And so these numbers, change constantly. In fact, they change so fast that I wrote the initial story at noon. I think it was Thursday or Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
By deadline, by 5 p.m., I had to revise the numbers.
Wow.
In one case, revise them down, and the other case, revise them up, which just illustrates what a gulf there was between these numbers. Just real quick, the first model projected about 3,600 total cases of coronavirus in Bexar County through July.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the second model, which came out of the AI lab, the artificial intelligence lab at UTSA, using a lot of publicly available data from across the world, they are projecting almost 30,000 cases through August. So you had the disparity there, 3,600 versus 30,000.
And were both of those models based on the idea that we continue to practice social distancing?
Yeah. And that was the big takeaway from from the story actually is that those numbers do assume that social distancing continues, through those projection periods.
Yeah.
Whereas if both of those models looked at what would happen if those restrictions were relaxed,
Hmm.
and in both cases the numbers just totally skyrocketed, almost to a million cases
Yeah, that was the
in
one that
both.
really blew my mind.
Yeah.
The I think it was the mathematics one that said if we immediately went back to our previous, our normal, uh, interactions, that we'd be at like what 920,000 cases
They were
in this area.
both models were in the same range, and
Yeah.
I quoted the Juan Gutierrez, the chair of UTSA's
Right.
math department, because he put it really succinctly. He said that with the evidence that we have, the virus just it can't be stopped
Yeah.
until there's a vaccine. We're going to have to just change the way that we live until there's a vaccine, and I
And
think
th-
that that's kind of the
yeah.
conventional wisdom at this point. I mean,
And that's kind of getting to, I think, what we're one of the most interesting things, and I think it's kind of disturbing what we're the sort of rebellion that we're starting to see in certain states against the social distancing practices. I mean, I think this has been a kind of a fragile compact from the beginning, that we've seen, which was based on the idea that people were going to make sacrifices for the collective good. And in Michigan and some other places, in Austin over the weekend, there was a protest with Alex Jones kind of helping lead the way there. And Greg, I was kind of curious what your take was on this, because it doesn't seem. I mean, I think it would be understandable if you had some sort of business frustration, and there probably is some, because businesses, so many have had to close and or limit what they've been able to do. But with these protests, my sense is that these aren't like business leaders who are out there leading these protests. I mean,
No,
what do you?
and I think the protests are kind of a confluence of things. I mean, there's been some reporting by the Washington Post showing that there are far right groups that are kind of fomenting these, and they're kind of working in conjunction with President Trump, encouraging
Right.
people at the end of the week to participate in these protests. So there's that. I mean, there's the far right political side of it, but then there is just kind of the brute fact of mass unemployment. I mean, you've got
Right.
22 million people across the country knocked out of work by restrictions to curb this virus. I mean, like that is real pain, and there's
Right.
there's a lot of desperation building up. So you can you have to. I mean, people who are staunch advocates of maintaining stay-at-home orders and travel restrictions. I mean, it makes perfect sense, but at some level they have to acknowledge the economic damage that this is doing too. I mean, you can't pretend like it doesn't exist. The answer is if these restrictions stay in place, and it's not clear that they will. I mean, obviously, Governor Greg Abbott last week was talking about reopening the economy, starting with some retail. I just don't, you know, I don't see how that works if you still have all of this fear. I'm not sure that retail, you can open it to some extent. I don't know that it's actually going to
Now,
take off.
now wasn't Abbott talking mostly about retail opening for delivery
Well,
only?
yeah,
Or
that's
like
and that's what I mean.
curbside, that
It's
kind of.
Curbside.
Yeah.
yeah, curbside, but I mean, just think about going to the Pearl, right? You're just going to walk
Mm-hmm.
around, kind of shop at the Pearl. How often do you know exactly what you want? I mean, that's just not the retail experience. It's rare that somebody knows exactly what they want, and if they do,
That's
they
right.
can just go to like a Best Buy website, which is
Yeah.
really good, and order it there. So I'm not sure how helpful curbside is
That's
for most
a good
retail.
point.
It just kind of doesn't make sense.
It,
So, I mean,
yeah.
I think you've still got these, even if you begin to open the economy in that way, you've still got massive job losses. And the question is what you do about that. And, I mean, Congress is now talking about a follow on, adding more money to the Paycheck Protection Program, which is the small
Right.
business loans. And that's meant to keep people employed. Um, the fact is that that initial, three and a half or $350 billion was inadequate. I mean, that money was gone in 13 days. Uh,
Amazing.
and they're
One,
talking about adding kind of a lesser amount now. That my guess is that money is going to go just as quickly, just because of the need. I mean, if we're going to maintain these restrictions, there's going to have to be a lot more money on the table from
I
federal
mean,
government.
one thing that struck me about the phasing approach that the White
Mhm.
House had was it's a high bar. I mean, first of all, you got to have your cases decline for 14 straight days, right? And
Mhm.
then
Right.
even through phase 1 and 2, the most vulnerable populations, which is either 55 and up or 65 and up, they're supposed to continue sheltering in place. So I mean, reopening the economy, even under the White House's standards, is a very slow, grinding process.
I don't think
And
that
also
there's
getting that so uniformly across the country. I mean, you're
yeah.
seeing, you're seeing the virus hit in different parts of the country at different
Mhm.
times and seeing spikes in different places. So like even getting that uniformly is going to be difficult.
Well,
Yeah.
and
And I think
just,
that go ahead, Greg.
you know, yeah, just think of the confusion there's been in these have been relatively simple, stay-at-home orders from the city and county. Yet there's been a lot of confusion about that. What's essential business? What's non-essential business? When do you have to wear masks? When don't you have to wear masks?
Yeah.
And what is 25% out? I mean, imagine doing a phased-in reopening like the governor is talking about. I mean, you talk about openings for chaos. I mean, it seems like there are going to be
Hmm.
plenty when you try to phase in certain businesses, allowing them to open to a limited extent. What businesses are those? What exactly do they have to do to open back up? I mean, it's just going to be very difficult, I think.
One of the things that's interesting to me about the protests that we saw in Austin, which were very much like the Tea Party protests we saw 10 years ago, and it's basically like, you're infringing on my personal liberty and don't tread on me, and this is socialism in practice, is that, I mean, Governor Greg Abbott, as the governor, is the person who, is put in place the stay-at-home orders. Now he's been sort of reluctant to do so along the way, and he's talking about opening things up. But I mean, he's really the person who's been in charge of that on a statewide level. And just last week, he was the one who announced schools are shut down for the rest of the school year. But yet, I don't sense that the protests were like directed at him. And there are certain places we've seen. I think it was actually the one in Austin, where you saw people chanting "Fire Fauci," pinning all the blame on Dr. Anthony Fauci for just basically being honest with people and telling them this is the reality we're looking at, and anything short of social distancing is going to lead to this spreading some more. So
I mean,
it's
I
kind of
think
weird to
people.
me. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think people are just looking. People are angry, and they're
Yeah.
looking for a target.
Right.
I mean, that's what it comes down to. And I mean, yeah.
Greg, I was going to ask you about, you were mentioning the Paycheck Protection Program and how fast that money ran out.
Mhm.
Was it your sense that local business people, that many of them were able to access that in that short period when the funds were there? And were there any snags that they had in trying to get the
Yeah, I
loans
mean,
through the banks?
it was very chaotic. I mean, it struck me as being chaotic throughout the
Right.
13 days. I mean, but especially at the beginning. I mean, you had this overwhelming demand. Uh, Small businesses flooded local banks with loan applications, and yet, the key to all of this, in order to have a truly government-backed forgivable loan, you needed a promissory note from the Small Business Administration, and lenders didn't get that until the following week. So
Wow.
they started making loans on a Friday, and by early the following week, they still didn't have this promissory note from SBA. So, at Frost Bank, for example,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were kind of stuck until they got that note from the federal government, basically saying, this we're backing this loan. And they were actually developing their own promissory note in house. I'm not sure if they ever had to use it or not.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it was just so they were contending with having this really crucial piece not in hand. They had thousands of loan applications. Uh, and this was pretty common to any lender in town who was doing PPP loans. And then on the other side of it, on the small business side, if you're a very small business and you don't have a regular banker, well, that put you at a disadvantage. If
Right.
you're not if you're not tech savvy or
Mm-hmm.
particularly sophisticated about finance, or even a little bit sophisticated, I mean, you might have gotten stuck out in the cold. In fact,
Yeah.
we're doing a story on those small businesses this week. So if you happen to be one of those businesses, please contact me. We'd love to talk with you. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, there was. I get the feeling that there was, a lot of thousands of small businesses in town were taken care of. I think there was a big segment of the
Mhm.
business community that wasn't.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap things up, I want to get a chance to talk a little bit about another one of the big effects of the of COVID-19 and the shutting down of the economy, which has been housing. And Josh, you've been covering this. And last week we saw Roberto Trevino come forward with a plan to kind of help people when it comes to evictions. We had um, uh, Cops Metro suggesting that late fees be suspended for at least as long as we're under this sort of declaration order. And I think part of the thinking behind that was that this would be one way of providing some help to undocumented immigrants who are here and cannot necessarily access some of the programs that have been put in place to help during this emergency. But this might be one way to help them through the housing situation. I mean, what was Roberto Trevino proposing exactly?
So the city has this thing called the Risk Mitigation Fund. It was established kind of as, or not kind of, but it was established as part of sort of Mayor Nürnberg's housing policy task force. The idea of it was that the city would set aside $1 million, and that $1 million would pay for uh, renters who are, or tenants who are basically in financial trouble, whether it's
Right.
because um, they're seeing drastic rent increases, they're seeing sort of like rising property costs, or whether they've already been evicted. um, it was in its initial phase, it was more geared towards, like, okay, San Antonio is seeing rising housing costs.
Right.
It's seeing a surge of development, a lot of sort of high end apartment complexes going up, and that's spurring gentrification and displacement and all that. And now, basically, what they're talking about on about sort of passing on Thursday is essentially sort of like adding on top of that. They're putting about 15 some odd $1 million back into the program, so it's about $16 million that they're
Right.
going to have on hand for rental and housing assistance, mortgage assistance. But on top of that, you're also going to see uh, the program's use expanded. So if you need help with groceries, if you need gas, if
Hmm.
you need internet access,
Yeah.
and you're having trouble with your bill, that'll be part of it. And they're also looking at expanding utility assistance as part
Mm-hmm.
of that. So kind of it's kind of the latest uh, piece of sort of this long line that you've seen for the past month or so, of like city and county officials trying to build like some kind of safety net for folks. Kind of this
Yeah.
started sort of before you had all these the stimulus at the federal level, and so this is sort of the latest piece of that.
And it's a fascinating thing because you're seeing the role of like city government expanding, and at the
Mhm.
same time that the city's revenue base is shrinking. Like
Yeah,
and so there's going to be all kinds of challenges that they're
Yeah,
looking toward going
and
forward.
it's there's an attempt to get some funding in kind of the follow-on uh, stimulus bill in Congress, get it
Right.
included in this next batch of money. It's not at all sure you're certain that that's going to happen. I mean, it's the Democrats in the House want it, but Republicans seem pretty resistant. So,
Yeah.
it's a lot of expense at the local level where you're already losing a bunch of tax revenue, and it's creating a tremendous pressure. I mean,
yeah, wow. Absolutely. Well, I think on that note, we're gonna wrap things up for this week. We hope everybody out there is staying safe and well, and we'll be back with you next week. Take care.